Welcome to the deep dive. Lately it feels like we're just bombarded with economic news that's constantly shifting.
Oh, absolutely.
Tariffs on, then maybe off, experts seem to be in, then out, funding's up in the air.
Yeah.
It creates this real sense of whiplash.
Yeah, it really does.
And trying to understand what it all actually means for businesses, well, it feels like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
It absolutely does. That constant back and forth makes it tough to know what's truly a significant shift and what's maybe just, noise in the system.
Right.
That's why it's so important to step back, take a breath, and really look at the underlying data.
And that's precisely what we're aiming to do today. We're diving into a really insightful article from the Harvard Business Review.
Ah.
It's titled The Economic Data You Need to Make Decisions Through Volatility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an analysis by Martha Gimbel and Ernie Tedeschi that, well, it tries to cut through this very kind of uncertainty and give us a clearer view.
That sounds useful. Their work in the Harvard Business Review, it often provides a valuable framework for making sense of these kinds of economic shifts.
Exactly. They've really focused on what the objective data is telling us, kind of beyond the day-to-day headlines.
Right. Getting past the noise.
Exactly. So for you, our listener, who might be feeling a bit lost in this whirlwind, our mission today is basically to distill the key economic indicators that Gimbel and Tedeschi highlight in their HBR piece.
Okay.
These are the metrics that can help you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of this, well, pretty volatile news cycle.
Got it. So where do they start?
Okay, let's unpack this. The HBR analysis starts by pointing to a definite increase in economic policy uncertainty.
Right, the feeling of not knowing what's coming next from a policy perspective.
Precisely. But they make a really interesting point that this hasn't necessarily translated into significant economic changes yet.
Ah, okay. So the uncertainty is up, but the economy hasn't massively shifted course because of it.
Not according to the broad data they looked at, no. What's fascinating here, as the HBR article details, is the sustained rise in the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index.
Right, I've seen that index mentioned.
Since President Trump took office, they note it's been a more prolonged period of this heightened uncertainty, not just the short spikes we've maybe seen tied to specific events in the past.
Okay, a sustained high level. And did they pinpoint the sources of this current uncertainty in the HBR piece?
They did. They give some really clear examples. Think about the on-again, off-again nature of potential tariffs with Canada and Mexico,
Mm-hmm, that's definitely been confusing.
and the lingering questions around the China tariffs, potential retaliation, that sort of thing.
Right.
And of course, the big question mark surrounding the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE,
Ah, yes, DOG.
and its potential to, well, significantly reduce federal spending as it tries to streamline operations. The market's definitely watching to see how deep those proposed budget reductions might go.
Exactly. And the HBR piece also touches on broader anxieties contributing to this, right? Like concerns about consumer spending, maybe.
Yes, and the unpredictable path of future immigration policies, too. They fold that in.
Okay.
But the key takeaway at this stage, and this is something the Harvard Business Review really emphasizes, is that while this uncertainty is definitely elevated and a cause for concern,
Yeah.
the core economic data hasn't yet shown significant shifts as a direct result.
Interesting. So the first big point is uncertainty is definitely up. You feel it, but the economic sky isn't falling yet anyway. We need to be aware of that disconnect.
Exactly, between the sentiment and the hard data.
Right.
That leads us nicely to their second key point in the HBR article,
Yeah.
federal government spending.
Okay. Spending. What's the story there? Because you hear a lot about cuts.
Well, despite all the talk about potential cuts and the impact of DOGE, their analysis of daily non-interest government payments reveals something quite interesting.
Okay.
It might actually contradict some of what we're hearing here.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that their analysis, which they detail in the Harvard Business Review, indicates that government spending hasn't significantly slowed down.
Really? Despite DOGE and the rhetoric.
Yeah. In fact, it's currently tracking ahead of where it was in 2023 and 2024.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, as the authors note, this is partly attributable to inflation, which is important context.
Sure, inflation boosts the numbers, but still.
But the main point stands. The data, so far, doesn't align with a narrative of immediate and drastic cuts in federal spending.
So basically, don't be misled just by headlines talking about huge cuts. The actual flow of money, for now, paints a different picture. You need to verify with the metrics.
Which really underscores the importance of digging into the numbers themselves, like the HBR authors did, rather than just relying on the political talk.
Absolutely. Okay, so spending is steady for now. What about the labor market? That's always a big one.
It is. And this is an area a lot of people watch closely. What does the Harvard Business Review analysis tell us about the impact of DOGE and tariffs on jobs so far?
Well, the data on overall initial unemployment insurance claims is quite telling here.
Okay.
The HBR analysis finds no sustained increase in these claims overall.
No sustained increase.
Right, suggesting that, broadly speaking, the labor market hasn't yet been significantly impacted by these new policies, but there is one notable exception they found.
Ah, okay. What's the exception?
Yes, the Harvard Business Review points to a sharp increase in unemployment claims specifically for federal government employees.
Okay, federal workers specifically.
Right. And it's important to note, as the article does, that while the percentage increase looks significant, the actual absolute numbers are still relatively low.
Right. Context matters. But even if the absolute numbers are low, could that be a kind of leading indicator? Maybe broader public sector job losses if DOG's plans really take hold?
That's a crucial question, isn't it? While the overall impact on unemployment claims seems modest for now, this uptick in federal claims certainly bears watching. It's a potential early signal. And to add a bit more detail from the HBR piece, the payroll employment figures from January to February actually showed an overall expansion of 151,000 jobs.
Okay, so overall job growth.
Yes, but the Harvard Business Review highlights that there was a decline of 10,000 jobs specifically within the federal sector during that same period.
Ah, so you see the divergence there.
Yeah.
Overall growth, but a specific decline in the federal part.
Exactly. So we're seeing a more nuanced picture than perhaps some headlines might suggest.
Okay, so while the immediate impact on the broader economy seems, let's say, modest, the HBR analysis does stress that if these government policies continue,
Mm-hmm.
we should probably anticipate seeing more significant economic consequences down the line.
Right. The effects might just be lagged.
What are some of those early signs they're already observing, according to their research in HBR?
Well, the Harvard Business Review notes seeing some initial federal layoffs. They don't specify exact areas, but in places that align with where you might expect cuts, given DOGE's mandate.
Okay, some early anecdotal evidence, perhaps?
And something more tangible. They highlight the 13% increase in February tariff revenues compared to the previous year.
13% increase in tariff revenue.
Yeah. This really underscores that the new China tariffs, for example, are starting to have a concrete financial impact. Money is actually flowing differently.
Okay, that's a hard number. And looking ahead then, the article suggests that if DOGE does implement substantial spending cuts, or if these tariff rates keep rising or, bouncing around,
Yeah,
we could see a slowdown in the short term.
that's right. And it's crucial to grasp their point in the HBR article here. These policies could indeed create significant headwinds for economic growth in 2025 and 2026,
Edwin 7.
without necessarily triggering a full-blown recession.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So not necessarily a crash, but definitely making growth harder.
Exactly. It's a scenario of potentially slower growth, maybe tighter conditions, but not necessarily a complete economic contraction based on what they're seeing now.
Okay, so given this environment, the uncertainty, the potential future impact, what specific data points does the Harvard Business Review article recommend we start paying closer attention to?
Right, the practical takeaway.
Because, as they point out, relying solely on lagging indicators, like the big monthly jobs report, might not be enough right now.
Yeah, things might be moving too fast for that.
They even draw a parallel in their piece to the beginning of COVID, where the sheer speed of change meant you had to look beyond the usual data sets.
Exactly. Given these potential shifts on the horizon and, the limits of those lagging indicators in such a dynamic environment, the HBR article points us towards some key real-time or near real-time data we should be tracking.
Like what?
Okay, first, they specifically recommend monitoring the daily Treasury Statement.
The daily Treasury Statement. Okay.
Okay.
What's specifically in there?
Focusing on non-interest government spending. This can give a much more real-time indication of whether government spending is genuinely starting to slow down.
More immediate than waiting for monthly or quarterly summaries.
Precisely. And they add, if your business relies on, say, a specific government department, you can even track their spending more closely within that statement.
That makes sense. Very targeted. What's another key data point they highlight from that daily Treasury Statement in the HBR article?
That also suggests watching the withheld individual and FICA taxes.
Okay, withheld taxes. Explain that one a bit.
So FICA taxes are those related to Social Security and Medicare. If businesses start to anticipate slowing down hiring or maybe even considering layoffs,
Yeah.
One of the first things we might see is a reduction in the amount of these taxes they're withholding from their employees' paychecks each period.
Ah, because there are fewer paychecks or smaller ones maybe.
Or they're just holding back less in anticipation. So a slowdown in the amount of these taxes being withheld could be an early warning sign, an indicator of slowing hiring or even potential layoffs in the private sector.
So it's a more immediate pulse on the labor market than waiting for the official jobs numbers a month later.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Okay, interesting. And after a period where things have been relatively stable on the jobs front, the HBR article also emphasizes revisiting a familiar metric, right?
Yes, absolutely. Weekly unemployment insurance claims.
Back to basics almost.
Kind of. After a period where these claims haven't shown much dramatic movement, they argue any sustained upward trend now could signal a broader weakening in the labor market and is definitely worth keeping a close eye on again. We might have gotten out of the habit of watching it so closely.
Right, need to refamiliarize ourselves with that weekly number. Okay, so that's government data. What about private sector data? The HBR article touches on that too, doesn't it?
It does. Private sector data can potentially offer even more immediate signals. Think things like data aggregators tracking job postings.
Okay, like online job ads.
Yeah, or maybe data on withdrawals from retirement accounts or credit card spending patterns. These can all act as potential early indicators. Canaries in the coal mine, as the authors put it.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
There is. It comes with a caveat.
Uh-huh.
Because it often reflects individual businesses or specific platforms, not necessarily the entire economy, its reliability can vary. It depends on how well it's maintained, how representative it is.
So faster signals, potentially, but maybe less reliable or comprehensive than the official government stats.
That's the trade-off, essentially. Useful, but handle with care.
Yeah.
It reminds me of back during the early pandemic days, some of that real-time mobility data gave a totally different picture than the official stats for a while.
Right, it captured the immediate behavioral shifts.
Yeah.
Okay, now one concern some people might have, especially in the current climate, is just, can we trust the government data itself? Does the HBR article address that worry?
They do touch on it. They acknowledge that this is a potential concern people raise.
Yeah.
However, their assessment, at least up to the time they wrote the article, is that there have been no actual signs of data tampering.
No signs observed.
Right. And they also make the point that economists, both inside and outside government, are generally pretty well equipped to detect or, frankly, leak such issues relatively quickly if they were happening. There are a lot of eyes on these numbers.
Okay, so cautious optimism on data integrity for now. So to kind of bring it all together then, the main message from this Harvard Business Review analysis seems to be that, yes, we are indeed in a confusing and volatile economic period.
Yeah.
And there's no clear end in sight right now.
Precisely. And rather than getting swept up in the often contradictory headlines and the political noise,
Yeah.
the most prudent approach for businesses and really for anyone trying to understand the economic landscape right now is, to adapt that famous phrase.
Which one?
The one the HBR article aptly quotes from Britain's wartime playbook, keep calm and watch the data.
Keep calm and watch the data. I like that. So the core message for you, our listener, is really to focus on these objective data points, the ones outlined in the Harvard Business Review, to navigate this economic uncertainty.
Yeah, don't let the constant barrage of news headlines be your only guide. It can be misleading.
Consider which of these data points, those daily Treasury Statement figures, the weekly unemployment claims, maybe even some of those private sector indicators might be most relevant to your own situation or your field of interest.
And maybe start tracking them. Make it a habit.
And here's maybe a final thought for you to consider, building on what the HBR article suggests. Given that uncertainty itself, just the feeling of it, can significantly influence economic behavior.
Right, it affects decisions.
How might proactively monitoring these specific data points, the ones recommended in HBR, actually provide you with a competitive advantage in this volatile environment? Could knowing the real numbers sooner than others help you make better decisions?
That's a really interesting question to ponder. Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Harvard Business Review's take on navigating economic volatility.